Game of the Year 2014. I have to admit, I'm a little bit nervous doing my first one of these, but it's just another video. I can do that, right? How do we start? Some kind of a reflection on the past year in video games, something like that? Okay, sure. 2014. What did we learn about ourselves or about video games in 2014? Well, I learned that I probably should have bought a Wii U at some point before 2014. But apart from me learning once again that you should never bet against Nintendo when it comes to a console, what else did I learn in 2014? That might require a level of self-reflection that I'm just not capable of. But why don't you listen to my top 10 games of the year, and maybe at the end of all this rambling, you'll be able to figure out exactly what I learned about 2014. I know this isn't really anything revolutionary to say, but comedy is hard, man. And you really don't need to look any farther than Jazzpunk for an example of exactly how hard comedy is in video games. As with all things humorous in this world, each player will view Jazzpunk through their own specific and subjective comedy lens. In my opinion, whether or not you find this game funny has a whole lot to do with exactly how old you are. And without a doubt, I am just the right age for most of the references and parodies in Jazzpunk to hit me square in the jaw. I mean, a Gravy Boat-based Wave Race 64 parody, a Matrimony-based Quake takeoff. I mean, this stuff is right up my alley. But in the end, I really don't care if you found the game funny or not, because I did, and that's kind of enough for me. But what I actually do care about is that developers and publishers continue to take chances with these small avant-garde games that give us all a different way to experience the wonderful medium which is video games. Earlier this year, when Brian picked Lovely Planet as one of his illiterate's book club selections, I had no way of knowing that this game would eventually end up here on my top 10 list. This game wasn't really even on my radar. I'd seen some screenshots of it and it looked cool, but I didn't really know what it was. What Lovely Planet turned out to be was one of the most interesting genre mashups I've ever seen, combining first-person shooting with speed-running time trials. Everything in this game feels so perfectly designed, so thought out, so considered. Even the lack of a crosshair, which some people find to be a fatal flaw in this game, I think is a perfect design choice for exactly what developer Quick Tequila was trying to accomplish. But it's not just that finely tuned gameplay that impresses, no sir. This game would put a smile on Lex Luger's face because it is indeed the total package. The whimsical Japanese-inspired graphics stand in direct opposition to the seriousness of the speedrunning gameplay and actually strike a perfect balance. And then the music of Colin Bowen comes in and the whole thing ties together in such a perfect way. And as if all that wasn't enough, then in come the leaderboards and they stoke my competitive fires as Brian and I trade scores back and forth on the leaderboards, sometimes even cracking the world top 10 in our quest to one-up one another. Alright, no, I've got to stop talking about this game. I've got to stop talking about it because the more I talk, the more I'm starting to convince myself that I need to rearrange my whole top 10 list. I mean, this sort of enthusiasm is reserved for a top 3 game, right? But in truth, my time with Lovely Planet was pretty short. Maybe about 2 weeks, maybe 10 hours if I really stretch it out. Eventually the game did lose its bite, the levels become a whole lot harder towards the end, and I really did sort of lose interest. But for that brief moment, when it flashed in the pan, that flash was so brilliant and so blinding. It made me enthusiastic. It gave me the sort of joy that you rarely feel in video games as an adult. Just this childlike glee that carried me on a cloud for a week as we played this game for Illiterate's Book Club. I am so thankful to Brian for having selected this game, and I am so very excited for what Quick Tequila might do next. The PlayStation Vita is a strange little handheld, with an eccentric set of features that never really quite seemed to click with consumers. I think that was in part because no game ever really truly utilized those features. Sure, you had games that used them as gimmicks, but you never had a game that made playing it a true exploration of the system and all of its capability. That is, until Metrico came along. yes, this is a game that asks you to twist and tilt and use every feature of the system. And that makes it really easy to dismiss as something that relies on gimmicks. Listen, I get it. I've been there. You're in the middle of an action game and all of a sudden you've got to hold your Vita perfectly flat and balance it so that your character doesn't fall off a narrow beam, or you've got to do some weird swiping thing. I get it. It's completely understandable when a game takes you out of its normal gameplay to ask you to utilize one of the features of the system. It feels like it's been crammed in there where it didn't belong. But if you could leave that baggage at the door for just a moment and think about a game that's designed from the ground up to utilize every aspect of a system's functionality, and not to utilize that functionality to check off some tick box on a features list, but to utilize that functionality to deliver a compelling and enjoyable game experience. And so if you can do that, if you can free your mind, then you don't have to use your imagination, because that game exists. It's called Metrico, and it's easily the best game that you didn't play in 2014. This one feels really weird to me. 6 months ago, putting Hearthstone on my list was a no-brainer. In fact, it probably would have been a lot higher than this on my list if only the year ended in August. But the truth of the matter is I haven't really played Hearthstone that much over the last 3 months, and because of that, it felt weird trying to judge it and put it on my list. Now, it's definitely not uncommon for a narrative game that I put down 10 months ago to make my top 10 list, but for some reason it feels different with Hearthstone. This is a competitive game that is moving forward. It's still going full steam ahead, and I'm not playing it. I feel like I've gotten off that train, and I'm not really sure that this game belongs on my top 10. But if I want this list to be honest, Hearthstone has to be on this list. Why does it have to be on the list? Well, because it's one of the top 10 games that I played in 2014. It doesn't matter whether I'm playing it or not, it's still a great game. What makes it so great? Well, it's that beautiful thing that Blizzard does these days. They took a concept that was created by someone else, that was burdened with complications, that was burdened with systems stacked upon systems, and they simplified it in such a beautiful way. Taking staples out of the Magic of the Gathering playbook like land, interrupts, and instants seemed sacrilegious at first, but the further I got into it, the more I embraced and loved the simple nature of the game. I am a believer. I trust in Blizzard. They have converted me. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was at the PAX where they debuted Hearthstone, and I turned my nose up at it. I didn't give it a second look, and now here I am putting it on my top 10 games of 2014. Vertical Drop Heroes HD. If you follow me or watch my videos, you already know why this game is on my list. For those of you not in the know, let me break one of my personal rules here. One of the things I try to never do when recording one of my first impressions videos, and that is make a simple, direct comparison between the game I'm playing and another game. Have you ever heard of Rogue Legacy? Well, if you have, then you can start to understand what I love about Vertical Drop Heroes HD. Over the last few years, we in the gaming community have been introduced to the beauty of the session-based persistent progression game, or the roguelike or the roguelite game. The game where you jump in, do a short run, earn some money or upgrades that then make you better on the next run. And each subsequent run gets you closer and closer to your final goal of defeating the game. Vertical Drop Heroes was definitely one of the best executions of this gaming motif that I played in 2014. It had just the right amount of combat, platforming, and upgrades to keep me hooked and keep me coming back for more. A 17-part YouTube series later, and I bested the game, I became the chosen one, and I rule all of time, space, and knowledge. Unfortunately, even with all that power, I was never able to will this game to the higher profile that I thought it deserved. In fact, at times I felt like one of a handful of people actually flying the Vertical Drop Heroes banner in 2014. You know, video games aren't the only thing that I spent my youth obsessed with. For a time, I was also heavily invested in pen and paper RPGs, most notably Vampire the Masquerade and Shadowrun. In 2013, Shadowrun stepped back into the video game spotlight with Shadowrun Returns. In 2014, developer Harebrained Schemes blew the doors off with Shadowrun Dragonfall. A better game than its predecessor in every way. While not an official sequel, the standalone expansion builds on everything that was done in Shadowrun Returns and improves it by leaps and bounds. The interface is improved, the items are improved, the gameplay is improved, the engine is improved. But most of all, they have improved the story. What an amazing tale that they've chosen to tell here within the Shadowrun universe. And this works as a really interesting gateway drug because you don't have to know that much about Shadowrun in order to get it. They're giving you the backstory that's necessary and resolving their story in one nice, tight bubble. It really is a gateway drug, and I would suggest that anybody who likes good fiction in games, anybody who enjoys playing out an interesting and compelling story, play Shadowrun Dragonfall. But be careful, because this first little taste of the Shadowrun universe just might get you hooked. I don't really even know where to start with Shovel Knight. I mean, clearly the game is a love letter to my generation, a love letter to those classic Capcom platformers. I mean, you've got the Pogo move in from DuckTales, for Christ's sake. This is obviously a game that knew exactly what it wanted to be and exactly what it wanted to honor in video game history. And I think the game completely succeeds in all of that. I can't even look back and see a thing I would change about the game. Its art style is spot on. Its gameplay is tight. Those controls are, oh my god, orgasmic. I love every aspect of this game. The soundtrack from Jake Kaufman is exactly what I want to hear. The fact that I can download it in actual NES format and listen to it on my Fama tracker is insane. This game is everything that I want out of a retro revival and more. And you know, the game is a feel-good story to boot. It's a successful Kickstarter that actually delivered. They've sold over 300,000 copies to date, a number that's only going to increase as they get onto the PlayStation family of gaming consoles. Yacht Club Games really have the world at their fingertips, but I would ask you, I would caution you, Yacht Club, please, don't make Shovel Knight 2. Instead, hear me out, instead, do for a different point in gaming's history what you did for 1990 Capcom game. Say maybe you target something like Treasure Games on the Sega Genesis, and completely reinvent them in that retro revival style that you've now perfected with Shovel Knight. The fact is, I don't think I'm ready for another serving of Shovel Knight, but I just might be ready for a serving of Gunstar Knight? Transistor. Man, this game came out early in the year and set the bar so high. I mean, there was nobody touching this game. It was my hands-down game of the year until November. Transistor was such an easy game to fall in love with. Everything was so wonderfully executed. The art, the story, the music, the world. One of the easiest ways to hook me into a game is to give me a sense of a world bigger than the story that I'm experiencing. And Transistor did that in such a fantastic way. They pulled me in. They made me want to understand more about Cloudbank, more about the world, more about the characters. They drew me into the emotional story they were telling me. And then they pushed it all over the top with an intriguing combat system that was deep. It made me want to delve into it and master it. How does a function interact with others? How do these things stack together as active, passive, or upgrade abilities? What attacks can I build? How can I break this system? How can I find a playstyle that works for me? And in fact, that question has driven me to go into the game's recursion mode, New Game Plus, not once but twice, just so I could continue to expand my build and get even more out of the combat system. And then, after Transistor has assaulted you with its story, with its visuals, its music, its gameplay, and you think it's got nothing left to hit you with, you start to notice the things going on around the edges, in the periphery, the little things, the touches that take this game from good to great. You can see that greatness in big things, features like Red's ability to hum, proving that while she's lost her voice, her spirit remains unbroken. But you can also glimpse that greatness in the little things that the game does. The fact that Red rips her impractical evening dress off at the knees to prepare for combat. And it was that kind of stuff, coupled with everything else that I talked about, that earned Transistor this spot in my top 3. Oh, and hey, did you notice that I somehow managed to make it through this whole thing without ever once comparing this game to Bastion? Do you know why that is? It's because this game has nothing in common with Bastion except for the developer and, I guess, the art style. Sort of. I did my best to accept Transistor on its own terms, and never, not even once, through any of my 3 playthroughs, did I experience something that made me say, this game's kinda like Bastion. You know, they say ignorance is bliss, and this year I think my blissful ignorance of the Assassin's Creed formula led to me thoroughly enjoying Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor on a level that many other experienced gamers simply couldn't. Time and time again, I witnessed critics and friends alike almost handicapped by their incessant need to compare this game to the Assassin's Creed and Arkham formulas. So much so that I quickly started to consider it an advantage that I hadn't deeply immersed myself in those games. I've never played an Assassin's Creed game except for just barely dipping my toes into Liberation, and I've only played Arkham Asylum to completion. Those facts probably go a long way towards explaining my infatuation with Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. I've played this game to completion, not just the story, but 100% completion, and I'm now working my way through the first released DLC. But hey, I'm a pretty realistic guy, and I can widen my perspective far enough to see that what I'm responding to here are time-tested formulas. We're coming up on, 10 Assassin's Creed games it seems like? 3, about to be 4 Arkham games. These are formulas that work. These are formulas that are proven, and Mordor borrows heavily from those formulas. But the one thing that it does bring to the party that is innovative and new is the Nemesis system. When it comes right down to it, we can take all those comparisons to other games and just push them to the side. Because it doesn't matter where you ranked this game this year, or where I ranked it, or even where critics might rank it in the pantheon of 2014 releases. The simple fact of the matter is that Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor is an historic release. And you can tell how serious I am by the fact that I use the super pretentious British phrasing, an historic release. But look, in a few years, it's not going to matter when we look back on this whether or not Shadow of Mordor stood on the shoulders of other industry giants to get where it is, because once it got there, it brought with it a unique and interesting feature that very well could and should change the AAA game space forever. The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Is it a remaster? Is it a remake? Is it a sequel? You know, I don't really struggle with that question too much, because for me it's simply an addiction. And as with any addiction, it starts with that first taste. In this case, the original Binding of Isaac. It got that session-based gameplay so right the first time out. You sit down, you play a game, and that run will never exist again. It hooks you, it draws you in, it doles out items at just the right increment, it gives you difficulty spikes, and you rise to meet them. The next thing you know, you turn around and 4 years have passed and you're still playing the same $5 game and you think, what the hell has my life come to? And just when you're about to come to your senses and realize the error of your ways, they release Rebirth. It's the game that you know and love, completely redone from the ground up. The engine, the art, the controls, the items, redone, remastered, reworked, rearranged. This is the same game you love, only better, only bigger, and only more life-sucking. In a year where my focus was playing games at face value, limiting my expectations and accepting games on their own terms, I had so much built-up expectation for this game. This game could have fallen so flat, but it flew higher than I could have ever imagined. You notice that I'm not really telling you anything about the gameplay or what I enjoy about this game, because Binding of Isaac, whether it's the original or Rebirth, is a feeling. It's about the experience of playing the game. It's a twin-stick shooter at heart, with poop and crying babies and weird demonic imagery. None of this matters as much as the experience of going through the game, of playing it, of looping yourself into its ecosystem and letting it slowly work its tendrils into your brain. The Binding of Isaac Rebirth is the alpha. It is the omega. And that is why it's my game of the year for 2014.